Greetings everybody and welcome to our first breakout panel of this conference. I am delighted to welcome our panelists here. 3 of them are in studio and 1 is on Zoom. Let me quickly introduce the panelists and I'll start very briefly just with me. I'm the moderator. My name is Colleen Magner and I'm from an organization called Rios Partners. I've been invited because we work in high stakes, low trust environments where there's conflict and we have to collaborate. And today's panel is on collaboration in education. And I am honored and excited to welcome our 4 panelists. Let me start to my left. Kulula Manona is the Director of Reading at the Department of Basic Education. Godwin Khoza is the CEO of the National Education Collaboration Trust. Zanele Twala is with us in studio, and she is the CEO of the Standard Bank Tutua Community Foundation. And online, welcome to Vuyiswa Nkonsa, who is the CEO of Bridge. And the 4 of our panelists have the daunting task of conveying some insights to participants of this trust, of this conference, about collaboration. And each speaker has a unique question that they will respond to. I'll remind you of the question. But before we get there, I'd just like to remind everybody of how to participate in this breakout session online. We'd like to make it as interactive as possible, but there are some protocols to follow. So the first is, if you are online, you will see that there is a chat functionality, and there's also a Q&A functionality and a poll functionality. So the first thing to do is to complete a poll that has been presented to you. We will pull up that poll and the results of that poll throughout the session that we have today. The chat functionality you will be able to view amongst participants, and it's a way of sharing content. The panelists and myself will not be able to see what's in the chat function. So the most important way to engage with the panelists is through the Q&A tab. And so please direct all of your questions to the Q&A tab. I will view it on my iPad, and I will direct it to the panelists in our 10-minute Q&A session. I also want to remind you that this will be recorded and you will have access to it for 6 months. So if you miss something, don't worry. Don't ask your panelists to repeat it. You can watch it again and learn from some of the insights again. So I'd like to get going, and the panelists each have 5 minutes to share. And we'll go in order of Kulula, Godwin, Vuyiswa, and Zanele. And I'm going to just remind you of the questions that you're responding to. My difficult task is to keep time. And we have 5 minutes per panelist. And I'm going to try and do this in a respectful and discreet way. And the way I'm going to do this is keep track on my watch. I'm going to try and do this to you, which means 1 minute. And I'm going to do this to you when time's up. And I'm hopefully not going to have to interrupt you. So that is the protocol that we're agreeing. So if I may, I'd like to invite Kulula to kick us off, and I'm just going to share the question before you start, okay. Kulula. The question is, why is it imperative that companies and non-profit organizations that run education programming collaborate and align with the agenda and priorities of the Department of Basic Education? And Kulula and everybody else, this is the starting question, but feel free to expand into other areas of learning. So your 5 minutes starts now.
Thank you, Colleen. I think we can all agree that there are quite a number of advantages to collaborating. But firstly, I am just going to pick up on one which I think is a fundamental value as it lays the ground when role players are about to collaborate. And that one is the opportunity that collaboration presents for an establishment of a shared understanding, be it an understanding of the problem, its scope, its depth, or be it a shared understanding of the objectives of where we want to take the collaboration to. And I do think that once we have that, it then provides a fertile ground for discussion, for exchange of ideas, and ultimately for some kind of buy-in, which will take us to some point where we would say we can now align our purpose. And so we do think that it forms a good building block for collaboration, that we know we are collaborating and this is the purpose for our collaboration and this is what we want to collectively achieve. I'm going to give an example of establishing a common purpose here. If we are going to take the issue of poor outcomes for our 10-year-olds, which were a finding of the PELS of 2016, we kind of all have an idea of the factors that lead to those low levels, but we do not know why that is happening. Some of the factors were referring to the fact that those children came from schools that were poorly resourced. Why then are these children coming, or why are the schools poorly resourced? It is then this kind of collaborative action and activity where we pull different skills, different expertise from different corners, where we can begin to get to a point where we can say our conversations are enriched when we have a collaboration. And so one will bring this to the party, the other one will bring that, and the other one will bring that. There'll be researchers. So as a department, we may not have all of that capital lying within ourselves as a department, which is why then collaboration becomes a very, very, very powerful tool. Also, I would say that it also assists if we have partners working with us, supporting us in implementing our agenda, because if we do it in an uncoordinated manner, as we have seen over the past, we risk a lot of wastage, we risk a lot of duplications, and we risk reducing the efficiencies. And we don't get to see that impact. Yet if we work together collaboratively towards a common goal, towards a common purpose, we are able to check one another. We are able to complement in terms of our offerings as a collaboration, and really maximize that investment and maximize that impact.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kulula. And you've given some of your time to the other speakers, and that's very gracious of you and very succinct. So I'm just going to reset and invite Godwin to go next. Thank you, Godwin. Please.
Right. So,
Sorry, Godwin, I forgot to ask you a question.
That's fine.
You were waiting for me.
Yeah.
So Godwin, the NECT is now in its 7th year, and it's done very well. What are some of the learnings that you've had in facilitating government, labour, non-profit and corporate collaboration together?
Yes. So, not the easiest of questions, but you know, collaboration is not a simple thing. It's easier said than done. And I would like to say that you know, collaboration, as we have experienced it in the past a couple of years, is different from an association in that in a collaboration you actually involve people, organizations, and agencies that are different. So you're going to have different starting points. You're going to have different viewpoints. So in starting and maintaining a collaboration, it's important that one acknowledges that the starting point of one partner or collaborator is different from the others, both at the level of actor groups as well as individual organizations. So if I would give an example with actor groups, we in the NECT, we run a collaboration that involves government, teacher unions, private sector, and civil society. All of those, you know, have got reasons of different reasons of existence, and different things are important to them. So it's important to take that as a starting point. But secondly, it's then important to continuously find points of convergence, find common points of interest, and lift those up and promote them in everything that you do with the collaborators. So history and literature and dinner table conversations will have it that trust is central to driving collaborations, and I agree with that. But I would argue that it often gets overemphasized. But anyway, let me just comment in support of the idea of trust. Collaborators will not get into a space where they don't trust that the other player will do what they promise. However, fundamentally, you aren't going to get a business organization that trusts unions. Doesn't happen. So this trust thing, it's a holy grail. It's something that one has to work on an ongoing basis. So you have to look for points of interest all the time. The competition between, the competitor to trust actually as a principle for holding collaborators together it's actually the anticipated outcomes. So most of the collaborators would actually agree on the anticipated outcomes. We've seen in the past 7 years of the NECT's existence that all the collaborators actually agree that we have to improve the quality of education. So that holds the differently wired players, if you like, together. And I think to hold a collaboration in a stable position, you got a balance between maintaining a level of trust and actually focusing on the technical aspects of achieving outputs and outcomes that are important to all the collaborators. So let me leave it there for now.
Thank you, Godwin. That's very helpful. Okay, so I'd like to also remind our panelists, I didn't do this at the beginning, but there is a camera over there. So when you're speaking to me, you also feel free to speak to the big audience that we have that are watching you, and lots of questions are starting to come through, which is wonderful. It would be great for the Q&A session. So Vuyiswa, are you ready to go? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Wonderful. So Vuyiswa, I'm just going to read your question out to everybody first. So Vuyiswa's question is, Bridge's approach to collaboration focuses on sharing resources, information and learnings through communities of practice and knowledge hubs. Why did Bridge choose this approach, and what are some of the successes that you've seen? Thank you, Vuyiswa.
Thank you, Colleen. So Bridge was set up in 2009, and it so happens that Dr. Mampele Rapele, who gave the keynote address, was one of the founders of Bridge. So a handful of education experts and social activists looked at how NGOs in education were working in silos and thought that there was a need to form Bridge, which does exactly what its name says. We connect stakeholders in education, and we do that through convening communities of practice. Now, these communities of practice are made out of people who have common challenges, who are passionate about learning, but who also want to find solutions to the problems. So through collaborating, we have been able to share resources, to share knowledge, so that people don't work in silos and don't duplicate some of the mistakes that others might have made. So in the education space, I find that organizations are very keen, not just civil society, but funders as well. We tend to be very open and very keen to share our successes, but not so much our failures. And I think most people learn a lot from what they're not doing well. So we learn a lot from our failures, so to speak. And Bridge exists to make sure that we don't work in silos, we share what we learn, and Bridge doesn't own the communities of practice. The communities of practice belong to the participants. So we tend to work towards building and commons. And we do find that when people feel trusted and they feel like they can trust you, they are able to share quite openly, but also admit to their shortcomings with an intention of coming up with solutions rather than just being a talk shop. Um, so some of our successes with collaboration have come through partnering with institutions that we would not ordinarily partner with. If I give an example of a huge project that was funded by the European Union, we partnered with 10 universities there. So there were universities and there were TVET colleges. And that project was to develop a framework for level 6 qualities for 0 to 4-year-olds. So a number of lessons were learned. So when that collaboration started, there was very little trust, but also stakeholders had formed flesh judgments and opinions about NGOs. And I'm happy to say that at the end of that process, through about each other's work, through developing that common purpose, through ensuring that we created more enablers than disablers, we were able to achieve the outcome, which was that qualifications framework for level 6 and 7 qualifications for 0 to 4-year-olds. But as Godwin said, collaborations are difficult. You have to work at it and you have mutual trust. You have to be intentional about how you communicate to each other as partners. You have to have that, but you also obviously need resources. And by resources, I mean finances, I mean adequate amounts of time, and I also mean the right people to be part. Most importantly, the collaborations that succeed have a purpose. So you get together for a purpose, you have a desired outcome or outcomes in mind, and you work earnestly in an open, honest, and trusting environment to achieve those outcomes. And a Bridge has been doing that past 10 years. We're a learning organization, so the project we take on, or every partnership is quite different. But we are committed to learning and also sharing experiences. Thank you.
Perfect timing, Vuyiswa. Thank you very much. Zanele, you're our final, last but not least, input. Thank you. Oh, Zanele, let me remind you of your question. We don't see many examples of corporate collaboration in this space. What are some of the barriers to collaboration and how might these be mitigated? Over to you.
Okay, thank you. I think the previous speakers have sort of touched on generally the barriers to collaborations. But I think if it comes to corporates specifically, I think one of the challenges has been that in a way, lack of time. I mean, Vuyiswa reflected on the fact that it takes time. It really does take time. It's not impossible, but I think a lot of people need to dedicate time when they talk about wanting to collaborate. And given the kind of day-to-day pressures, hustles and bustles, challenges around delivering KPIs, we really need to acknowledge that when we develop our systems and everything else, that we need to also apply our mind to giving time to collaboration. I think when it comes to corporates, and I always say to people that I'm absolutely glad that I'm working for a corporate foundation where there are no legalities around where the Competition Commission could really sort of challenge us for collusion. There's no collusion in the non-profit space. And in this case, I think we've begun to see a lot of collaboration happening based on the understanding that we can maximize our impact by working together as corporates, but also focusing on working together with government. But when we look at the impediments and the barriers of working with government, is the challenge of bureaucracy. I mean, some organizational cultures lend themselves better in terms of collaboration and working together. But we know that with government and its bureaucracy, I worked for government, but it took me a lot of time to actually figure out where do you go for what, to who, in terms of some of the government departments. So you can imagine if internally, I mean, I was at the presidency working with a lot of government departments, if as an internal person, it took me time to understand the maze and to know where to go. You can imagine externally. So even with corporates, I think the challenge is always where do we start in a bureaucratic system like government? So that knowledge is absolutely important. But I think some of the barriers also are around the tools and the facilities. We've just seen how COVID-19 has provided us such an opportunity to begin to collaborate. Barriers such as proximity, which have often been reflected, are no longer an issue because we're now on Teams, we can reach all parts of the world and we can collaborate. So the tools which were often seen as a barrier have suddenly been things that can access us to be able to do that. But I think also issues of confidentiality are absolutely important. And intellectual property protection issues have been quite key. And with corporates, I think that has been quite a critical area in terms of trying to see if you can protect I call it sometimes kingdom building. These are some of the things that we really have to apply our minds now in terms of letting down for purposes of maximizing our impact, which in the past have set as a barrier, especially around a competitive environment where we are all jostling to be the better people. Yeah, I will just stop there. I could say a lot about it.
Thank you very much, Zanele. Let me stop there. And thank you to the panelists for keeping time. We have around 10 minutes left for Q&A. There are lots of questions that have come through. I'm going to try and synthesize. But to create a bridge to those questions, just a reminder, Kulula kicked us off by highlighting the importance of building a shared understanding about pooling resources from different skill sets. That's the importance of collaboration. Godwin mentioned that everybody comes into this with different priorities. It's important to acknowledge those different priorities and then to find the common points. And that is created through trust. And then Vuyiswa spoke about the importance of failure and sharing failure. And you can only share failure in Bridges' experiences when there is enough trust. And in that sharing of failure, we learn quickly and able to transcend some of our current ways of working. And finally, Zanele's insights are that we should give time to collaboration. It's really important. And understand the structures in which bureaucracies work and where to start, and particularly breaking through the sort of territorial mindset of kingdom building. So lots of great insights there already. Let's bank those. And so I'm going to go to the questions that aren't going to go back to that, but specifically look at new new areas to learn from. So let me start with a question that's specifically at corporates with you, Zanele. And it says, all corporates need proper acknowledgement of their investment. How do we ensure this in the cases of collaboration? How to give fair weighting to acknowledgement?
Yeah, I think it's also been raised that there's a cost to collaboration. I think we often think that, you know, it can just happen and you don't offer funding resources towards it. But I think I want to also build on the point that Vuyiswa made, that if you have clear set out outcomes from the beginning and priorities in terms of what you want to achieve as a collective, and together with that you align certain matrix or measurements in terms of how you could achieve that, it sets everybody from a beginning of knowing exactly what has to be achieved. And I think in that case, for people that are funding collaboration, I've often heard that, we don't want any talk shops, or collaborations are often woolly. But that does not mean that they cannot be done. And I think when we prioritize and we set the objectives, what we want to achieve, we set measurements in terms of how, whether it's in the form of outputs, if there's going to be a report that has to come out, if there's a toolkit that has to be developed, and that is what is being supported or funded. But also just allowing the fact that it will take time for people to find each other, that relationship building, which sometimes we cannot quantify in financial terms, then it's doable. And I think we have to really, as corporates, also acknowledge the fact that whatever resources in terms of finance that you attach to that, they can be measurable, and you do also need to allow the time for people to build the trust and to find each other, and allow that time, take the risk to not quantify also certain aspects. And in that way, I think then you'll be able to be at ease in terms of accounting for your resources and your money that you're spending.
Thank you, Zanele. I'm now going to direct the question to government, to Kulula. And then the other few questions I'm going to direct to Godwin and Vuyiswa because they're more platform-based questions. The question is, what are the department's plans to improve coordination and reap best results from NGO initiatives and also increase NGO accountability, not only to the funders but also to the department?
I think one of the best examples that I can lay on the table to respond to that question is to cite a collaborative structure that has recently been established by government and civil society and NGOs, particularly in the reading and literacy space. And that is the National Reading Coalition. It sets an example of what it is that a government can do, because it then kind of find a way to operationalize the collaboration and allow for the strategic issues that the collaboration needs to be driving to actually happen without getting itself entangled in that. And how did we do that? Is to find a vehicle that would be able to do that. And in this case, we found the National Education Collaboration Trust, which is the NECT, as the vehicle that would actually drive that collaboration. So that we have a collaboration that is intent, that is not woolly, that has a framework that has been set out all the collaborators understand that this is the framework of our collaboration, and we have all agreed to it. We are aligning our purpose as these collaborators, and we have established a way in which we are going to move. It provides structure. And when you provide structure, then you promote that accountability. Accountability by all, including accountability from us as government. And so I think that is one of the mechanisms that we have really thought that we should actually employ to ensure that we have a moving vehicle in this collaboration.
Thank you, Kulula. And it speaks very much to Zanele's point about metrics and being able to measure. So Vuyiswa and Godwin, I'm going to read out a few questions here, and please respond to the ones that you feel. I'm going to give each of you just one opportunity to respond, because we've just got 4 minutes left. Which question you can most or best answer. The first is, whoops, challenge of technology, just bear with me. So collaboration doesn't just happen. It requires specific skill sets, dedicated personnel, and funding and capacity enablement. It also requires safe space and a theory of change. How do we better support these skills, these spaces, and these capabilities? As one. The other is, could you please comment on what some of the key skill sets and enabling conditions are for creating opportunities of high-functioning, effective, and sustainable collaborations? How do we better visualize our ecosystem so that we know where to start? And this is quite a practical question. What are some of the platforms that we can use as we arrive at an integrated approach between government, public, and private organizations to ensure to maximize effectiveness? So there's a theme here about skill set and capabilities. There's a theme here about maximizing effectiveness. There is also what's the theory of change, how to better support, and what are the practical platforms to do so. Vuyiswa, I'm going to start with you, please. Are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Go ahead.
I'm going to speak to the question about the theory of change. Because when that process begins, you make a certain number of assumptions. And as Bridge, I mean, theories of change are stock in trade, and we find that it's not only good for getting funding and the funder, but it's also good for our own monitoring and evaluation processes. But I think as an organization, we've learned enough to not just stick to a path that doesn't work sometimes. So if you consider our work pre-COVID and the desired outcomes we had COVID, a lot of that has changed. But where many non-governmental organizations go wrong is not to communicate to a funder because of the uneven power dynamics. And I think as an NPO and an NGO, we have had to do some internal introspective work to honestly look what we can deliver and take opportunities to engage with our funders and to inform and educate at times so that we're not just going down a path that is not going to the desired outcomes because of the changing environment and the changing context. So I would say being confident enough to alert your partners to work on the relationships so that you don't have skewed power dynamics. And that's something I guess you learn over time, because it's very hard for most NGOs to stare down a funder and say, these indicators don't work for me, but this is what I can do through ABC. So I think you have to have that level of honesty to indicate when things are going awry.
Thank you, Vuyiswa. Can I stop it there because we have a minute
great.
left?
Thank you.
Thank you. Godwin, you have the final word.
So let me compress a 100-minute answer into a 1-minute answer. It's a complex one, but let me just say that collaborations are run by a combination of intangible, skill sets and the tangible skill sets. You got to be able to influence. You can't command collaborations. You influence, you use suasion. But over and above influencing and using suasion, you got to bring the technical goods on the table. You must know what you're doing, and you must produce the outputs. The combination of the two would actually be good for starting collaborations and maintaining them. Thank you.
Feels like there's a lot kind of buried under what you've just said there.
There was only 50
well
seconds
done,
left.
well done. It's a great way of framing it. Great way of framing it.
Yeah.
So I want to, on this note, extend a very big thank you to our panelists and thank them for the succinct, really insightful and very different points of views that hopefully now can set up the rest of the conversations. And we haven't yet got to the poll that you completed at the beginning, but we can pull that up for you too. It's interesting to note that you thought organizational silos are the biggest barriers to collaboration. After that, we've got corporate self-interest and followed by lack of funding and different objectives. So lots to build on here, and thank you for bearing with us in the tech, and look forward to the discussions.
Thank you so much, Colleen, as well as the other panelists for joining us in conversation. Ordinarily, there'd be a resounding applause from the audience following this conversation. But we thank you so much for your time as you make your way off the stage to the left-hand side of stage.